because we're talking to Martijn, who is an entrepreneur within the data science field, which is something that we haven't talked about that much yet. But of course, that is also an option. There's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit in the data science market, I would say. And I think Martijn can tell you everything about his journey. So welcome, Martijn. Please introduce yourself and take the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Shall I share my screen for the presentation? I
yes, please do.
All right. 1 second. Can you see the presentation now?
Yes.
All right, perfect. All right, so yeah, thanks everybody for coming. So just a little bit on where I come from. So I'm Martijn Nanne. I have a master's in data science. It's already a couple of years ago. And I have about 5 years of data science experience and a lot more of coding experience. And I first worked at a startup, and then I started doing freelance work, and recently also started my own startup. And over the last few years, I've worked in at least 6 startups, in usually very early stage. So that's quite different, I think, from a couple of the other speakers. So that might be interesting to some of you that want to learn more about this and about the challenges in startups and also how it's different. Yeah, and I recently started a new product focused on e-commerce companies to apply data science to optimize marketing campaigns there. So the first thing I wanted to show you guys is the data science hierarchy of needs. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with, but it's very relevant if you are going to work in a startup. I think the big difference between working in a startup and working in an established company, and you are going to work in a field of data science, is that a startup usually still has the challenge of the lower stages of the hierarchy of needs. Of course, larger companies can also have this issue, but usually they already have a whole bunch of data that they don't know anything or they don't know what to do with it. However, if you are a data science startup, you might have an idea of, for example, how you can push a certain optimization, or you might want to solve a problem with machine learning. However, you still have to collect your data first before you can do anything interesting with it. And also, if you are a startup, you need to create value relatively fast. So you might not have 1, 2, 3 years to build up this huge project and then have a success in the end. You preferably want to create value as fast as possible and then make it more and more intelligent and complex over time. Yeah, so we need to solve this this data collection issue, and fancy AI is usually the last step. So as a startup, you might have this wonderful vision of like, okay, well, in 5, 10 years, we want to have this extremely intelligent system. However, on the short term, we still need a use case that we can solve fast. And in my experience, this use case usually depends on first solving the data collection issue. So where are we going to get some data from? And then making this data insightful. So that might not be as interesting as you hope as a data scientist, because you always want to apply machine learning and reinforcement learning. However, a little bit of business intelligence and creating insights from that is usually the first step in a startup. Of course, I'm generalizing a little bit, and every startup is different, but in my experience, this is usually the case. So just a few ways of how we can start collecting data when we are building a new company. So one thing is public data. I've also worked in a startup that was um, do predictive maintenance for roads. And in this case, we had a lot of public data. So there's a lot of public data available from the government. Also weather data, because the weather has influence on the road, on the roads, on the where we drive, right? Um, so we had a lot of public data from the government, which is fairly standardized. And we had weather data, and we also tried to incorporate satellite data, which uh, is also semi-public. So that's kind of the second point, where we can get data from sort of standardized systems. So a satellite provider, you can either buy, or and in the European Union, you can get access to satellite data for free. But the main point is that at least it's in some way it's standardized data that you can access. The third one, so I've also worked in two startups that were generating their own data. So for example, you have to first create an app that's useful to users, which in turn starts to generate data. So for example, I've worked at a healthcare some health tech startup where they wanted to predict how people would feel after taking a medicine based on their behavior. So they created an app that can monitor their behavior, uh, and then that was starting to generate their data set. So you have a startup that has this big vision of, hey, we want to create we want to use data science in order um, to improve the drug testing process by monitoring somebody's health. But then the first step is actually to create this app that can generate data. So it's not like we start off with this awesome data set and we can start applying data science. Um, so the fourth one is that users do actually have data, uh, but it might be a little bit different between every user, between every customer that you have. But you can kind of force a specific format they then have to upload, and that will enable you to get going with your data product. And the last one, which is a lot more tedious, is that you have custom integrations. So, for example, I know a startup that does medical imaging diagnosis, and they will have to work with a hospital, and then this hospital has to, well, basically provide them automatically with these images, and these images are in business systems, so you have to somehow integrate with their internal business system. Which might be quite tedious to integrate with specific business systems. So yeah, the general rule is that we always want to try to minimize integration. However, as a startup, you might not be, you have to compromise somehow. And then, for example, what we are doing now, we can integrate with standardized systems like Google Analytics or Google AdWords, where we can easily pull data from. But we also have to get access to transaction data, which is a little bit harder to get access to. So that's currently still a little bit of a custom integration that we want to automate in the future. So there's all these trade-offs in an early stage startup or an early stage data startup that you have to kind of be creative on how you can access data easily. Yeah, it's usually messy. I guess everybody in the data field uh, can relate to that. That when you get data from a company, 80% of the work is always in the data cleaning, the data integration, and just getting your data right just before you can actually start to visualize it, or you can start to apply to predict the thing you want to predict. And one thing, when you are integrate, or when you want to work with different customers uh, or different businesses, is that you can start to standardize the process. So what we are doing currently is that we are telling our customers, hey, we want you to apply to uh, provide your transaction data in this specific format with these columns, because everybody kind of has the same data, but they might just have different columns, or just a slightly different formatting. And is that over time you try to standardize the data input more and more. But yeah, the ways of data integration is are quite different. So the ideal world is that with a button click you can start pulling in data, which is the case for data analytics. But sometimes you have to force a format and you provide APIs that they can talk to, and sometimes we have to do custom integrations. All right, so just a little bit of an example of how my most recent project has started. I think it's quite interesting. It's basically from scratch we started this. So we had this idea based on our backgrounds, is that we know that we can optimize marketing campaigns better for e-commerce companies. And well, you can basically optimize budgets from one campaign to the other one. So maybe one campaign is more profitable than the other one, so it should get more budget than the other one, etc., etc. And eventually you want to find this optimum in how you split your budgets over different marketing campaigns. And you want to predict this, and you want to make this as optimal as possible. So that's kind of the big vision, to have this self-learning algorithm that will optimize their marketing campaigns, and maybe also other things. So if we look at the data sources, we have Google Ads, we have Google Analytics, we have payment transactions, we get the margins of all the products, we get the whole product lists every day. Yeah, and there's also a few more data sources. And these are on different levels. So the standardized data sources are Google Analytics and AdWords. We can just simply pull them in. A standardized format is this transaction feed. And a custom integration right now is, for example, the discounts on products, which are going to be different between each customer. So this was the first thing of like, okay, which data source are we going to use? And it's also has been a little bit of a process of, hey, what is actually available? And it turned out that e-commerce companies have already make these kind of transaction feeds and can provide this quite easily. So the process is that the first use case was just to make this data insightful. The second step will be to optimize this based on heuristics. And then this third step eventually will be to create an optimization algorithm. So we have to keep it really simple to be able to create value quite fast. I'm going to be speeding a little bit so people will have time for some questions. This is going to be the last slide. So All right. So from my experience, the difference between working in startups versus in big companies, um, I would say typically in a startup you will have a little bit more responsibility and a wider set of tasks. So I've always been in charge of creating both the data pipelines up until the machine learning, up until deployment of this software. Whereas in a larger company, you might only be responsible for a part of that. So if you enjoy working on a whole bunch of different things in a fast-paced environment, you typically see that more in startups. It's also easier to bring in new ideas because you can just simply, it's such a small environment, you can just talk to the CEO and you can bring up ideas. That's something I always enjoyed a lot. And you typically work with newer technologies. However, in larger companies, um, you can do more specialized work. You can work on your very specific research field, which could be really cool. There's a lot more money to spend on big projects, um, and yeah, there's definitely a lot to learn in larger companies as well. So it's really a choice what you prefer, and you have to test it out. All right, thank you. Then I think we have a few more minutes for some questions. I hope you enjoyed
Perfect.
this.
Thank you, Martijn, and thank you for making the time for some audience questions. I think a question that we all have is, well, you being an entrepreneur in this field, it's being an entrepreneur is always risky, right? It's more risky than a set job, a permanent job. How do you deal with that, and why did you become an entrepreneur?
Um, well, I think I become an entrepreneur mainly because I feel like it's more exciting. I just get a little bored if there's not a lot going on for some reason in my work, and also really because I can basically be creative and think of new ideas and immediately execute them. Um, well, dealing with the risk. So yeah, I definitely deliberately set up a financial buffer, so I don't have to worry for, let's say, I don't get any money in. So for example, now we don't have a lot of revenue yet. So most of yeah, personal expenses are on our own expense. Um,
So you wouldn't start as an entrepreneur, but first make sure that you have like um, a buffer to work with.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Also, from people I know, most try to at least have a year or something in as a financial buffer. But the good thing about entrepreneurship in software startups in general is that they're very low cost in general. So you can um definitely until, for example, until the first investment rounds or until you have your first customers, um, server costs are quite low. You don't have to invest a lot of money in physical goods or anything like that. So that's I feel like it's still a fairly low risk
Yeah.
business.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And something else, a question we got earlier today is, do you have any advice for people who would like to land a job at a startup?
Yeah,
Especially now during COVID, it might be more difficult, but how do you do that?
yes. Well, there's a couple of ways I figured out over the years. Definitely one place to look at is AngelList, or it's angellist.com or angel.co. Then there you can start to look for startup jobs in the Netherlands. Yeah, exactly. Um, and then you also have Deal Room. It's a Dutch. It's also a Dutch startup that makes that site, and there you can filter quite heavily on, also on the type of startup. So even like, hey, I want to work in a startup focused on healthcare, for example, or on a B2C or a B2B business. And then in the past, both on AngelList and Dealroom, I just go through the list. I look at startups that look interesting. Then I look on the website. I can see, hey, are they looking for data science or data engineer? And then you either apply through the website. But what I can also recommend, if they do not have any jobs on the if they do not have any jobs on the website, you can also look up the CTO on LinkedIn, for example, which you can usually find, and you can just say, hey, I think the startup is really cool. Do you want to have a chat sometime? And this is something you can't do with a big company, just reach out to the CTO. But if the company is only like 5, 10, 20 people, they actually really, really like to, that somebody reaches out. And in my experience, it has been a very good way of introducing yourself.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, because you think that everyone does that, right? But that's just not the case. A lot of people don't. So that's good advice. In the chat, we got the question: what was the name of the second website? Was it? Oh, somebody posted it. Was it dealroom.co?
It's either dealroom.co or dealroom.com. Yeah.
I think Robert just posted it, which is great. One last question from the audience before we finish. Did you have experience in large companies before, and was the switch to startup and entrepreneurial personally? Because you put the comparison table, people are wondering.
Yeah, so I have worked for well, it wasn't really working. So at the end of my my studies, I've been at Booking for 6 months, Booking.com. And well, personally, after my studies, I was already getting really into startups. So I started working at a 35-person company first, and then I went to early stage startups. So what I personally, because I already knew that I one day wanted to start my own business, I figured I thought I could learn more in startups, as in the full stack engineering part. So if you're building your own product from scratch, you need a wide range of skills. So you need to know how you can set up servers. You need to know how to make a machine learning pipeline. You need to know some data engineering stuff. You might need to know some web development to build a product. So that's why after Booking, where I saw that people were very, very specialized on data science, I thought, well, I'm not going to learn the wide range of skills that I think I need in order to succeed. So that was my choice after I was at Booking for 6 months.
Yeah, so even though you didn't start as an entrepreneur, you always knew that that was where you were heading. And we get this question a lot, like, is it a good idea to start at a big company or at a startup? And I think what you already just said, it really depends on what you want to learn. Like, do you want to become a specialist, or just have a very diverse skill set, and what is the environment that suits you? And I think you really showed that in your comparison table and in your presentation, for which I would like to thank you very, very much, Martijn. Very cool to hear the entrepreneurial spirit. If people would like to know more about that, go and follow Martijn and his journey with this company. It's probably not going to be the last thing you started, I suppose. So thank you, Martijn.
All right, thank you too.
Yes, if you could stop screen sharing, I'll end
Okay, cool.
this session. Thank you.
Thank you.